In the annals of African history, few kings have left such an indelible mark as King Agaja Trudeau, the ruler of the Kingdom of Dahomey. His reign in the early 18th century saw not only military prowess, but also a dynamic response to the complex interplay of European colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. Agaja's legendary victory over the Portuguese, which resulted in the return of thousands of enslaved Africans from Brazil, positions him as a significant figure in African resistance to European domination and exploitation. To understand Agaja's impact, one must first delve into the origins and political landscape of the Kingdom of Dahomey. Dahomey, located in present-day Benin, was one of the most powerful and organized African states in the 17th and 18th centuries. Founded in the early 1600s, it expanded aggressively through conquest, absorbing neighboring kingdoms and establishing itself as a major power in the region. The kingdom was a militaristic state, with a centralized political structure that enabled it to maintain control over vast territories. Agaja Trudeau ascended to the throne in 1708, inheriting a kingdom already embroiled in the politics of the transatlantic slave trade. At the time, the European presence on the West African coast was growing rapidly. Portuguese, British, French, and Dutch traders were establishing forts and trading posts, creating a complex network of alliances with local rulers. Many African kingdoms, including Dahomey, became entangled in this network, capturing and selling prisoners of war or other unfortunate individuals into slavery in exchange for European goods, most notably firearms, which reinforced their military power. Agaja, however, was not content with merely participating in the slave trade as a junior partner to the Europeans. From the outset of his reign, he embarked on an ambitious campaign of territorial expansion. One of his most significant achievements was the conquest of Aleda, a nearby kingdom that had long been a rival to Dahomey. This victory not only solidified Dahomey's dominance in the region, but also increased its access to European traders. Despite his kingdom's participation in the slave trade, Agaja saw the growing influence of the Portuguese as a threat to Dahomey's sovereignty. European encroachment was not just economic but also political, as European powers sought to control key coastal areas and ports. Agaja's desire to maintain control over trade and protect Dahomey's independence led to a fierce confrontation with the Portuguese. By the early 18th century, the Portuguese had established a significant presence in West Africa, particularly in the region that would later become known as Angola and along the Slave Coast, where Dahomey was located. The Portuguese were among the most active participants in the transatlantic slave trade, and they relied heavily on African intermediaries to supply the slaves they needed for their plantations in Brazil. Agaja's relationship with the Portuguese was fraught with tension from the start. While Dahomey did engage in slave trading, Agaja was acutely aware of the dangers posed by European influence. His main concern was the Portuguese control of key coastal trading posts, particularly Ouidah, a port city that had become one of the primary hubs for the export of slaves. Control of Ouidah would allow Dahomey to dictate terms to European traders and retain greater control over its economic destiny. In 1727, Agaja launched a decisive military campaign to capture Ouidah. His forces, consisting of highly disciplined warriors, including the famed Dahomey Amazons, a regiment of female soldiers, overwhelmed the Portuguese defenses. The conquest of Ouidah was a significant victory for Agaja, as it not only gave Dahomey control over one of the most important slave trading ports on the West African coast, but also sent a clear message to the European powers that Dahomey would not be subjugated. The capture of Ouidah marked the beginning of a broader conflict with the Portuguese. In retaliation for Agaja's actions, the Portuguese intensified their efforts to destabilize Dahomey. They formed alliances with neighboring kingdoms, supplied them with firearms, and encouraged rebellion against Agaja's rule. However, Agaja was a skilled diplomat as well as a formidable warrior. He successfully navigated these challenges, using a combination of military force and strategic alliances to maintain his grip on power. One of the most remarkable episodes in Agaja's reign was his negotiation with the Portuguese for the return of thousands of enslaved Africans from Brazil. This extraordinary event was not merely an act of diplomacy, but also a demonstration of Agaja's commitment to his people and his ability to leverage power in unprecedented ways. The Brazilian colony, under Portuguese control, was one of the largest importers of African slaves in the New World. By the early 18th century, the African population in Brazil had grown significantly, with many slaves originating from the West African coast, particularly from the Kingdom of Dahomey. These enslaved Africans were forced to work on sugar plantations, enduring brutal conditions that led to high mortality rates and numerous revolts. Agaja's campaign against the Portuguese was not solely driven by economic considerations. It also had a deeply personal and moral dimension. The king recognized the suffering of his people in foreign lands and sought to bring them back to their homeland. After his victory over the Portuguese at Ouida, Agaja used his newfound leverage to negotiate a deal that would see the return of enslaved Africans from Brazil to Dahomey. The details of the negotiations are not fully documented, but it is clear that Agaja's military successes played a crucial role in forcing the Portuguese to the bargaining table. The Portuguese, eager to maintain their trading relationships with Dahomey and other African states, agreed to repatriate thousands of enslaved Africans from Brazil. This was a monumental achievement, as it represented one of the few instances in history where a significant number of enslaved Africans were returned to their homeland through diplomatic means. Agaja's reign, while marked by military conquest and territorial expansion, also demonstrated a visionary approach to diplomacy and statecraft. His efforts to repatriate enslaved Africans from Brazil were unprecedented, and they highlighted his commitment to preserving Dahomey's independence in the face of European encroachment. However, Agaja's complex relationship with the transatlantic slave trade has been a subject of debate among historians. On the one hand, he was a staunch defender of Dahomey's sovereignty, using both military force and diplomacy to resist European domination. On the other hand, his kingdom continued to participate in the slave trade, capturing and selling prisoners of war to European traders. This paradox reflects the difficult choices faced by African rulers during the era of European colonization and the slave trade. Despite his military successes, Agaja's reign did not bring an end to the slave trade in Dahomey. In fact, the kingdom remained a major participant in the trade throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. However, Agaja's actions set a precedent for later African leaders who sought to resist European colonialism and protect their people from exploitation. Agaja's legacy is a testament to the complexities of African resistance during the era of the transatlantic slave trade. His victory over the Portuguese and the repatriation of thousands of enslaved Africans from Brazil stand as a powerful symbol of African agency in the face of European domination. While Dahomey continued to be a major player in the slave trade, Agaja's reign demonstrated that African rulers were not merely passive participants in this system, but could also assert their power and influence in ways that challenge European interests. In the broader context of African history, Agaja's story highlights the dynamic interplay between African and European powers during the early modern period. His reign serves as a reminder that African states were not monolithic entities but complex societies with their own internal politics, ambitions, and struggles for survival. Agaja's victory over the Portuguese and his efforts to return enslaved Africans from Brazil exemplify the resilience and resourcefulness of African leaders in the face of unprecedented challenges. Today, Agaja is remembered as one of Africa's greatest kings, a ruler who not only expanded his kingdom's territory, but also sought to protect his people from the ravages of the transatlantic slave trade. His legacy continues to inspire those who seek to understand the complexities of African history and the enduring impact of the slave trade on the continent and its diaspora.